This is a monthly discussion of books by Central Asian researchers. It is organized by Central Asian Research Initiative. The goal of our discussions, monthly discussions, is to spotlight research by Central Asian authors and to promote more citations of books by Central Asian authors. I am really delighted to moderate discussion of this book titled Surviving Everyday Life, The Securityscapes of Threatened People in Kyrgyzstan. I first got to know projects for this book at the CES conference in 2018. Back then, I was just fascinated by surprising and interesting findings that the authors brought with their research, and also by how much love and dedication is really invested into researching topics for this book. So today we have four authors from the book joining us to discuss their chapters, and the authors are Nina Bagdasarova from AUCA, Shavkat Atakhanov from the Kyrgyz Uzbek University, Aksana Ismailbekova from Leibniz Centrum Moderne Orient, and Asel Myrzabekova from AUCA. But before we turn to the authors, we have two wonderful discussants who will first present their comments and questions on the book. Our first discussant is Aijan Sharshenova from the OSCE Academy and Arzuu Sheranova from Corvinus University. So we'll first start with discussing the book, then turn to authors, and then open up for questions and answers from the audience. But dear audience, dear listeners, please send your questions and comments as our presenters discuss the book. We only have 1 hour to make sure that everyone is heard and is able to comment on the book. The language for today is Aralash. You can switch from any language to any language. Это может быть на русском, на киргизском, any other language that is necessary to communicate today is welcome. So with that, I'm happy to pass the mic, give the floor to Aijan. Aijan, please, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Erica. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to discuss this book, and specifically thank you for Aksana to sending me this book. This is definitely like a book that's going to be in my collection, and it's an excellent reference book for Central Asian studies, whether you do theory or you do empirical stuff. So I'm definitely keeping it. I'm not donating it. I'm not sharing it. So don't ask. Yeah, thank you. And before I start, I should probably mention my positionality as well as a researcher and as an individual. So I work at the OSCE Academy in Bishkek as a postdoctoral research fellow. I also acknowledge that I'm Kyrgyz because the book is about threatened people in Kyrgyzstan, and I'm not necessarily that, being a person of Kyrgyz ethnic group and having other privileges as well, having access to education, having access to the state services, so on and so forth. So I think it's also important to acknowledge that I understand my privileges and understand my reader's view as well. As an academic as well, I'm a politics scientist, so foreign policy, international development. So this is not exactly my field of politics. And therefore, it was particularly exciting for me to read the book because it's not something that I am very familiar with. So in a way, I have fresh eyes, so to say. And for me, it was really a revelation how much research is ongoing on the topic of Kyrgyzstan. And it's really amazing to see a book that's departing from the old and slightly worn out discourses of state security, of state stability, of regime stability, of linking Kyrgyzstan to Afghanistan, like we often see in the security discourses in the region, linking security to stability of the political regimes, whether they are autocratic or democratic, linking stability to democracy, which is also quite a persistent narrative in the research on Central Asia, or linking security to development. So in a way, this is a really refreshing work to review, because it offers absolutely unprecedented original research based on very rich empirical data. And I would highly recommend, if you get the book, read the preface and read the introduction, because it was quite interesting to see how the ideas have developed, how the editors came up with the idea, with the project, how it got funded. But I also appreciate that you mentioned your positionality, and that's why I mentioned my positionality, because I'm learning from you. This is something I didn't think about before. So I read how you explained that you acknowledge that you're also an ethnic Kyrgyz, that even though you talk about shifting from Western-dominated or West-centric research narratives, you still acknowledge that the book has been funded by a Western institution. And you explain how you mitigated that potential question. So I really appreciate that you mentioned your positionality as well. I think it's very important nowadays not to be just a good technically researcher, but also an ethical researcher, a researcher that's very self-reflective as well. I really appreciate that you also managed to build an excellent team. Shavkat is here, Asel, Nina. This is really amazing to see lots of local researchers for whom these empirical cases are not necessarily an academic case, the one that you look at and you move on. It's like exams in the former Soviet Union. You pass an exam, you forget the course. And I think that's the case for lots of, well, not lots, but some unethical researchers. But for you, it's a lived reality. It's not just the case, temporary one. This is something that you face every day, that you're surrounded with, and I really appreciate that you took your time to reflect and self-reflect on these subjects. I'm not going to go like chapter by chapter, because if you want to know more about the book, buy the book, or ask your library to buy the book. But I would like to highlight some of the strengths, and I think the most important strengths is the strong empirical foundation of the book. And don't get me wrong, lots of Central Asian books have really strong empirical side, but sometimes they're like lacking on the theoretical side. This book is a perfect balance. You have a very solid theory that explains Securityscapes concept, something that I have not heard before, so for me it was a revelation as well. But then it applies theoretical concepts and quite freely and openly interprets in different chapters, applying it to different case studies from Kyrgyzstan. So I really appreciate that it's a good balance of theoretical foundation and then very strong empirical cases. I would also like to note that it is refreshing. As I said, it's a shift from the traditional security discourses, both in political sciences, Central Asian studies, foreign policy questions. It's shifting from the state security and regime stability to people security and people stability. And I think that is a very important shift. Given the speed with which the governments or regimes in Kyrgyzstan are changing, I think it's no longer relevant to speak about regime security or state security. It's more important to speak about people security. I would also like to highlight that the book is really easy to read, like whatever chapter you pick up. It's got really good storytelling. This is something that is very contemporary, very modern. So it's not dry theoretical academic language. It's very live language that helps lay reader understand what their researchers are trying to deliver, but also to relate. Maybe because I come from Kyrgyzstan, so I can relate probably a bit more than other researchers. But I was reading and I was also discovering different corners. Specifically, thank you to Shavkat, я никогда в Аше не была, и тем более в этих кафе не была. Но то, как вы написали, мне прямо было очень приятно и интересно. Такое ощущение было, что я прямо с вами, с вашими коллегами хожу по этим кафе, чувствую запах этих лагманов иркутских и узбекских, этих пловов. Да, то есть настолько книга написана живо, настолько она пропитана именно жизнью, да, то есть не теорией и академией, а именно вот жизнью повседневной, той, которую мы не видим. Я не вижу, да, будучи как бы человеком из Бишкека, я не вижу, как живут, например, в Люли я не вижу, как живут ЛГБТ-комьюнити, да, в Бишкеке, то есть я с ними как-то не пересекалась. В эти клубы я не ходила. То есть вот эта вот история живая, она вот интересна, мне кажется, не только академикам, но и просто людям, живущим в Кыргызстане или интересующимся Центральной Азией, потому что это гораздо лучше, чем туристическая книга, да, это гораздо глубже, чем туристическая книга. То есть любой человек, кто хочет о Кыргызстане узнать, мне кажется, будет интересно почитать именно эту книгу с этой точки зрения. And I have some questions for the discussants. I don't know how much time we would have. I don't want to take too much time. But one question that I prepared was for all contributors was, can you identify and share your security practices as central researchers and educators? And I understand that this is a very personal question. And I just got curious while reading it, because while I was reading, I was thinking about my personal Securityscape. Do I feel safe as a woman? Do I feel safe as a researcher? Do I feel safe as a Central Asian? So I understand if you don't want to answer that question. Again, this is a very personal one, but it would be interesting whether you apply Securityscape concept to your personal and professional lives as well. And then I have prepared some questions for the individual authors. So I'll read them out and then feel free to not answer them. If you don't want to answer, again, I'm not offended. So I have a question for Aksana. And the question is, did you notice similar patterns of building Securityscapes through language training for children among other ethnic groups? Given that Russia is the main destination for ethnic Russian labor migrants too, do they feel like, do Kyrgyz communities in the south of the country feel that they need to train their kids in Russian language more as well? I have a question for Shavkat as well. У вас вопрос к Шавкатака. Вот вы написали вашу статью в 2018 году, да, судя по тому, как книга вышла. Мне вот интересно, вот с тех пор что-то поменялось для владельцев кафе в Аше? И в частности, вот в 2020 году у нас была еще одна революция, и мне интересно, вот насколько вот эти вот практики, да, как владельцы кафе пытаются ужиться в системе отношений в городе Ош, да, и на юге вообще, насколько это эффективно сейчас, да, учитывая, то есть какие у нас сейчас власти, какие у нас сейчас реалии. И вопрос тоже к вам насчет люлей. Для меня это было вообще шоком прочитать, как тяжело на самом деле живется этим людям. И у меня единственный вопрос всегда был в голове, пока читала вашу главу. Власти наши Кыргызстана вообще что-нибудь делают для того, чтобы хоть как-то облегчить как бы существование этих групп населения, хоть как-то их включить, помочь, учитывая как бы их интересы. I also have a question for Asel. I was curious whether gender regimes and norms differ for Kyrgyz women in labor migrant communities abroad and Kyrgyz women living in Kyrgyzstan. So my question is basically on, I imagine like when you're in Kyrgyzstan, you have your family that puts pressure on you. You have your neighbors, you have your far relatives, you have your friends, work colleagues, and so on and so forth. But female labor migrants, ethnic Kyrgyz in Russia, they probably have a different system of pressures. And I appreciate that. So I wonder how that differs between Kyrgyz women inside the country and Kyrgyz women outside the country. I also have a question for Nina. And in some of the personal accounts that you discuss in your chapter, there seems to be a lot of escapism. And I'm not a psychologist, but I felt like lots of your interviewees were escaping now and escaping in a way like living in the future, but also escaping here, imagining themselves living somewhere else, like in a more tolerant society. And one of them also mentioned that living in Kyrgyzstan with a sexual orientation that they have is an everyday challenge. So they have to act to pretend to be someone they're not. And I wonder what's the mental toll or emotional toll that this leaves on your interviewees. And given how closely you have worked with them, you probably, and also given your background as a professional psychologist, I wonder like if you could see, because I understand you did not probably uncover it in the book due to ethical reasons, but I wonder like what toll it leaves on the people to live like this throughout their whole lives and potentially not actually being able to escape now and escape here. These are all my questions. Thank you.
Aijan, thank you so much for your really insightful and interesting comments. Спасибо большое. So our next discussant is Arzuu Sheranova. And a reminder to our audience, we will not have a lot of time for Q&A from the audience, so keep sending your questions and comments as you come up with them. But please, Arzuu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be discussant today to discuss a book edited by these wonderful authors. I would also like, first of all, to thank Aksana Ismailbekova for inviting me to this discussion. I'm very honored. So although I'm not a theoretist on this discipline, but I have some practical experience. I have been working in community security projects back in 2015. Before I started my PhD in 2017, so I'm very privileged to be part of this discussion. So as Aijan already mentioned, this book is a collection of essays on security making in Kyrgyzstan. So what is different, the different approach this book applies is that it looks at security from non-traditional lenses. In particular, it looks into everyday lives of threatened people. So how these individuals deal with the insecurities, so how they perform security making. So the concept of Securityscapes has been applied in this volume to explain the security strategies, security choices which individuals make in order to deal with the insecurities. And these are often linked to ideas of time and space. The book in general I found the book very valuable because it reveals understudied topic of insecurity from below, not from the state. As Aijan already mentioned, it does not look at traditional threats such as radicalism and other things, and it in general argues for more diverse accounts of insecurity. So as the book claims, local perceptions of insecurity they can be radically different from those which are perceived by the state. And it reminds me of the project where I was part, as I already mentioned, where I was very much surprised to find out how security perceptions were very different for various individuals, despite they shared one community. So, and I also think that this ethnographic volume is very important and innovative because it also reaches out to the most close communities such as Mugat Lulis, which are really difficult to reach out and to make a research on. And also it provides very intimate accounts, narrates very individual personal stories of these threatened people, which we do not usually meet or come across in our everyday life. So I found the study very important because it makes voices of unheard people to be heard. And I think that in the future, I would encourage to do more this kind of research, especially on women and children in Kyrgyzstan and other countries in Central Asia, because as we can see, their lives are also threatened currently. And as a closing remark, I would really highly recommend this book, not only to those who are interested in security studies, but also to researchers from other fields, because each chapter provides very descriptive background information, which you will find very interesting. I mean, on various topics, which we will find very interesting. And so in general, the reading was very easy to read, as Aijan already mentioned. And I was also traveling with, from one chapter to another, like from one cafe to Mugat communities. So it was very fascinating reading. Thank you very much. And my question. I have one general question and several questions to each of the authors. So the first question, the general one, is that to what extent the strategies of security making are related to individuals not experiencing a threat, in this case a dominant group, especially in their strategies in securing businesses and economic well-being. By this I mean labor migration. I assume some of these strategies could be quite universal in context of Kyrgyzstan. For example, bribing the officials in order to make own businesses survive, for instance, or running into politics to cover up own businesses. And also dominant groups, children learning Russian, for example, in order to prepare them also for migration, for labor migration in Russia. Then let me switch to individual questions. Question for Aksana. In your research, some of the informants mentioned that they are aware of threats which their children might experience in Russia, such as skinheads. Based on it, could we assume that insecurities in Kyrgyzstan are more alarming than insecurities which might happen in Russia when they travel there for work? Question for Shavkat. В вашем исследовании, Shavkat, вы сказали, что до 2010 года еще был такой, скажем так, метод защиты своих бизнесов, как избираться в местный кенеш города Ош. И мне просто интересно, после 2018 года, вот, сейчас какая ситуация? Поменялась ли она? Потому что после 2010 года по известным причинам стало меньше представителей узбекского населения в местном кенеше. Вот. Question to Asel, for Asel. What differences were more crucial in resisting mixed relationships described in your chapter? Ethnic, racial, or more confessional, religious differences? And finally, question for Nina. Efficiency of solidarity groups were well described in Asel's chapter. Here I mean online solidarity groups, like networking groups, where mixed families supported each other on different matters. And I just wonder, are there similar solidarity groups among LGBT communities in Kyrgyzstan? Thank you so much.
Arzuu, thank you so much for your great comments on the book. Thank you. They really nicely complement what Aijan said as well. So we will now switch to authors. We'll start with Nina Bagdasarova, and Nina Bagdasarova's chapter is on LGBT communities, Securityscapes in Kyrgyzstan. Каждая авторка и автор, у вас по 5 минут, чтобы ответить на вопросы. Нина, пожалуйста.
Начали, у меня последняя глава. Спасибо. Я, наверное, буду на русском языке говорить. Насчет вопроса, как мы свои собственные определяем Securityscapes как исследователи, поскольку и я, и Асель, у нас такая привилегия, мы работаем в Американском университете в Центральной Азии. У нас нет такой острой необходимости, как исследователям, очень сильно себя контролировать. Хотя вот в ситуации каких-то политических обострений, когда сам университет становится, атакуется какими-то силами, тогда, возможно, вот я, например, попадала там в какие-то пропагандистские видео, что я кыргызских студентов учу неподобающим каким-то ценностям и так далее. Вот. Но я не скажу, что это как какая-то угроза. Скорее, мы, наверное, не буду за Асель говорить, но я скорее испытываю и стараюсь какой-то Securityscapes вокруг себя выстраивать просто как житель страны. И для меня это общие какие-то такие угрозы, это уровень преступности на улицах, это милиция, которая тоже может быть небезопасной в некоторых случаях, какие-то такие вещи. Вот. И стратегии, в общем, очень похожи. И я хотела сказать, что, отвечая отчасти на вопросы, которые мне лично были заданы, стратегии, которые описаны для других групп, они, в общем-то, те же самые стратегии и другие люди используют. Просто они реже попадают в такие ситуации, и они меньше рефлексируют, потому что вот это состояние, когда ты чувствуешь опасность, тогда ты вынужден продумывать свое поведение. И когда мы разговаривали с представителями тех групп, с которыми у нас были интервью, то видно, что у этих групп очень четкое представление. Они сразу понимали, о чем речь, о чем наши вопросы, и как бы мы легко находили вот это русло, как с ними это обсуждать. Я проводила просто для сравнения, как контрольная группа, проводила интервью с жителями просто там спальных районов Бишкеке, например. Примерно тех же районов, откуда у меня были ребята из LGBT-комьюнити. Там совершенно другие вопросы, то есть у людей по этому поводу просто нет рефлексии, там нужно несколько сделать сначала шагов, чтобы их навести на мысль, что жизнь-то бывает небезопасной.
Хорошо, давайте тогда, Shavkat Aka, вы можете ответить на вопросы дискуссантов.
Спасибо. Насчет вопроса Arzuu, после 2010 года, чтобы защитить свой бизнес, лица узбекской национальности, идут ли депутаты или не идут? Да, наши исследования указали, что после событий июня 2010 года многие узбекские бизнесмены были вынуждены уехать за границу, и поэтому последующие выборы, которые проходили у нас в городе, проходили без участия бизнесменов. В списках партии можно было увидеть кандидатов, простых людей, такие как учителя, врачи и безработные, но кроме бизнесменов. Так как вот, депутатский мандат во время 2010 года, июньское событие, она не могла защитить ни бизнеса, ни самого хозяина этого бизнеса. Поэтому был свой авторитет, депутатский мандат уже после событий 2010 года потерял. Вот это и можно увидеть. У нас в 2020 году в апреле должны были быть выборы Узкого городского кенеша, и все политические партии вывесили свои лозунги, транспаранты и раздали, но, увы, из-за эпидемии COVID-19 в апреле 2020 году этот выбор не состоялся. Но тогда среди этих кандидатов был только один бизнесмен-узбек, Сухбатулла Мирзаев. Он шел под номером 7 от властной партии Бремдик. Но, увы, к осени 2020 года после выбора Бремдик исчез с политической арены. И, само собой, и Сухбатулла Мирзаев тоже исчез с политической арены. И когда состоялся выборы в Горьком году, в этом году, опять можно увидеть список депутатов, которые получили мандат ни одного бизнесмена узбекской национальности. Ни одного бизнесмена. Теперь следующий вопрос насчет Юлии цыган. Да, им очень трудно, но тяжело не только у нас, но и в Узбекистане. Я когда защитил диссертацию, я написал, собрал материал не только Кыргызстана, но и собрал Узбекистана. Поэтому везде им трудно. Везде им трудно. И они считаются самым уязвимым слоем общества. Не только нашего Кыргызстана, но и Таджикистана и Узбекистана. Да, у них есть неполная средняя школа, именно Турсензада. Там всего 6 кабинетов, учебных кабинетов. Эта школа еще была построена методом Ашар еще в 60-е годы 20 века. С тех пор население этого селения выросло несколько десятков раз. Но школа как была, так и остается. И поэтому после 4 класса всех учеников школ, этой школы Люли, отправляют в другие школы, узбекские школы. Вот здесь вокруг радиуса 5 километров находится узбекская школа. У многих нет средств существования, нет оплата за этот проезд. Поэтому многие цыганские дети не доходят до адреса, до школы. Поэтому они много раз требуют, и мне всегда вот просят помощь, чтобы я написал местные органы, вышестоящие органы, чтобы помочь и построить школу. Увы, на наши письменные отклики еще государственные органы не отвечают. Если отвечают, ссылаются на отсутствие средств. Поэтому вот часто у нас происходит революция, поэтому нашим политикам еще у них нет времени до наших людей. Поэтому очень плачевное состояние. Если вы посмотрите вот цыганский квартал, можете себя чувствовать, вы находитесь в какой-то гетто, индийское гетто, ну, старым индийским гетто. Никакой политики в отношении цыган-люлей у нашего государства пока, увы, нет.
И сейчас перейдем к Оксане. Оксана, пожалуйста, Оксана, потом Асель, пожалуйста, обсудите ваши главы тоже и ответьте на вопросы. Оксана, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Arzuu, Aijan, for your great feedback. I would immediately start from your questions. First, Arzuu's question was related to the issues concerning the space and time, whether there is differences in Securityscapes making of different groups. For example, I remember that with the Nina, we used to talk a lot and give example of Mahala, because Mahala, in my case, it was one of the most secure place for ethnic Uzbeks, but for LGBT, this was one of the most dangerous place for and no one could enter there. So, and there was kind of a tension within Securityscapes. Whose space is this? Where is the security space, and who is security space it is? And this would lead us to the concept of Securityscapes, which is intersubjective social practices. In other words, people's imagined world of security and insecurity, and that structure their lives as they go along doing their own business. So the main idea was to look at how the Securityscapes can be so different for different groups, but logic would be the same, to secure their lives. Now, the second question was how the dominant group, for example, Kyrgyz, try to use strategies of security making, especially in relation to protecting their business. Of course, Arzuu suggested that many businessmen in Kyrgyzstan try to bribe officials and run into politics, but I just came recently from Kyrgyzstan, and there is another third category that was quite surprising and became even prominent, was working with criminals. and especially a lot of private money lending companies are working with criminals. They are asked to engage in debt collection practices. So this is kind of a new business sectors are emerging on the intersection of criminality and business. This is one thing that has to be mentioned. And another thing, when we are, all of us have been working on sensitive topics, and in my case, because in the case of Nina, maybe her informants were more open, but in my case, they were quite closed, and they didn't want to verbalize their problems. Instead, they would always show me that life in Osh wonderful and colorful. But and another challenge that I came across was gaining trust of people within a short period of time. Being Kyrgyz woman and working with Uzbek informants was quite challenging, especially in the post-conflict context. So thanks to Shavkat Atakhanov, I could gain trust of people quite well. And I was also open to other method of investigation, such as participant observations, which was quite helpful for me to just to observe when people don't want to talk to me. Another thing is there was a question about insecurity in Kyrgyzstan and in Russia, whether there is kind of a differences. In my understanding, that the insecurities both in Kyrgyzstan and in Russia are interrelated, but the people have different types of insecurities or dangers, threat in two places. But nevertheless, they try to find one strategy, single strategy that would combine both insecurities in both countries. So in other words, they want to kill two birds with one stone. So I just gave the example of how many Uzbek parents try to give their children to Russian kindergarten, Russian schools, Russian courses. And another thing was in relation to migration, whether people migrate mainly due to financial insecurity, and whether there is only economic incentives. But I would also add to this argument that the migration is also embedded in cultural expectations and obligations and kinship relations, so it's quite complex. And now to Aijan's question. Aijan, my personal security is my top priority when I start doing research. So first thing that when I start my research, I would immediately try to affiliate with the local institution, first get permission, at least inform, and I would always get the support letter in Russian language with signature and stamp. And for this Securityscape project, I got support from Academy Science of Kyrgyzstan, from Ablubek Asankanov, who has been extremely helpful to my project as well as to the project of Shavkat Atakhanov. And concerning this access to Russian course for Kyrgyz, whether there is differences in difference between Kyrgyz and Uzbek, I would say that there is big differences. We have to divide Kyrgyz into those who live in urban area and those who live in the rural area. And of course, Kyrgyz, those who live in urban area, they have access to Russian language courses, kindergarten, schools. But those who are Kyrgyz who live in the rural area, they cannot afford this, and many Kyrgyz who plan to go to Kyrgyz children, especially who plan to go to Russia, they have to learn the Russian when they are in Moscow. But what I have noticed in Moscow is that many Kyrgyz parents prefer to speak with their children only in Russian language, and many children couldn't speak Kyrgyz. So this is my recent experience in Russia.
Thank you, Aksana.
Thank you.
Оксана. Теперь давайте перейдем к Асель. Асель, пожалуйста, ваши 5 минут, ваши ответы. Спасибо.
Thank you very much, Erika, Aijan, and Arzuu, for hosting us. I will start with a question of Aijan regarding whether there are gender differences in gender regime and norms for women, Kyrgyz women in, for example, in Russia as labor migrants in that community or living in Kyrgyzstan. So I assume, yes, there are differences, but I assume that the women in Russia are more free from the community, which is they are more empowered as they are employed, they are more independent, but I'm not aware of particularly how these differences are making an impact on their personal lives, because my research was on mixed couples who live in Kyrgyzstan and didn't leave Kyrgyzstan. So they were in this community with their family, with their friends, and surviving here and seeing what kind of threats they have and how they were managing and navigating in Kyrgyzstan, in Kyrgyz society. So that was my interest, not those who are just mixed and have citizenship of Kyrgyzstan and live forever, but live in Kyrgyzstan. That was my actually goal. And but based on the cases that were described in the chapter and other cases that I am including in my dissertation, yes, there were couples that would actually search to finding the third place to be together, not in Kyrgyzstan, because they would feel that there, away from their families or away from community which is surrounding them in Kyrgyzstan, they would be more safe. And that would be more for those couples which looked like different and they were perceived as a threat by the majority. And that would be also maybe close to the last case I'm describing in my chapter of interracial couple. And when they were actually feeling safe in Russia, so because they had this experience being migrants in Russia, and when the wife was deported from Russia to her home country, she had to flee it from her family to Kyrgyzstan, third country again, because it was more safe to be not in her country, not to be with the family. It was more safe in somewhere else. And the couple was still looking for a place to be free and together and maybe moving, for example, to Turkey or other countries. So again, looking for a third place to be free. As for the question of Arzuu, what are the differences, meaning what is more crucial for these mixed couples, whether it's ethnic, racial, or confessional differences, I would say that we come back again what is actually Securityscapes, right? So this is about imagined and perceived boundaries. And everyone is perceiving or imagining differently. For some, it would be ethnic boundary, like, no, you shouldn't cross it. For some, it will be racial. For some, it will be confessional, and sometimes even origin and locations and citizenship, and etc. So just different background. And my chapter is more about controlling women. It's more about making this moral panic because of them misbehaving, making choices without others to force them to do that choices, because mostly for our country, it's just like normal to be violent to women making the choice for themselves. For example, bride kidnapping, right? Yes, everyone thinks it's not okay, but it's in some way okay, right? Everyone does that. But when a woman is finding someone who is a foreigner, outsider, that is making a moral panic. And this can be everywhere in the family, it's in the streets, it's when you are doing shopping or when you are just walking. And this is actually, there are lots of Uyat women and Uyat men who they just want to keep that boundary and guard that boundary, not crossing ethnic, racial, confessional, and etc. these boundaries. And if we speak about what is the most crucial, maybe I would say that everything is crucial, but more maybe visible differences when they are visible. For example, if there is a couple who, for example, Chinese and Kyrgyz woman, when they go and that when they don't speak, for example, in the street, no one will say anything, right? But as soon as it will be vocal with visuals that they are not speaking in Kyrgyz, for example, then there will be a big moral panic. But when, so if we speak about outside, but for some families, even ethnic boundaries, it can be very crucial, even if the man comes from Muslim ethnic group, even if he is a citizen of Kyrgyzstan, even if he is even from the same region, even if he speaks Kyrgyz, right? It's still not, it may not be enough for the family, because it would be a threat to cross that boundary. And so this is actually how I was amazed how creative are couples. So what kind of Securityscapes they are actually using, and that was amazing for me.
Thank you, Asel. Thank you so much. So I should have noted that Asel's chapter is on mixed couples. Thank you, Asel. So we only have a few minutes left. I don't see any questions to the authors, but since we have a few minutes, let's tune in to Nina again and have her answer questions that she wasn't able to answer earlier today. I'm afraid to start speaking. I don't know. Is it okay, my sound now? I tried to change something. Okay, so I'm just, I want to answer Aijan, the Aijan question about, sorry, to Aijan question about escapism. What I was trying to show in my chapter that really there are specific place and time combinations, like space-time continuums, that people who are in normal situation feel too tense. They try to move to heteropropia, so it's somewhere where we can share space, or we can share specific space and spend time together, or they move to utopian kind of thinking, and then it's, yes, it's in a way kind of escapism, because that's mostly about dreaming of living in Kyrgyzstan and starting to live somewhere else, and it's about some, I don't know, miracle place where you will be safe. I don't believe that there is such a places in the world for anybody, but as my colleagues already said, we all imagine in a way our security boundaries. So I think I wouldn't say that the groups that we studied, they have some exclusive kind of strategies or ideas. As Aksana said, the logic is the same. For even if people feel very safe, they belong to dominant group, they think that everything is for them, but still everybody has problems. Everybody imagine some threats, and in our cases, it's just a more extreme expression of these strategies, and they became more visible in normal, so-called normal life. They are not so prominent, maybe. Thank you, Nina, so much.
Thank you for giving me opportunity to.
Thank you. So I have one last question to all the panelists here, to Nina, Shavkat, Asel, and Aksana. So you covered quite a few groups. You covered Luli, LGBT groups, women, ethnic minorities. Who else do you think would fit in this category of threatened people looking for strategizing about their security in everyday life? that were not captured in this book, because even though this book is rich in content, I'm sure there's something that was left out. So just in 30 seconds or less, can you please tell who else is not, it needs to be included in this conversation? Let's start with Aksana, then we go to Shavkat, Asel, and then Nina. Please, Aksana.
Wonderful question, as if you were our reviewer. One thing, we had another author from Tajikistan, and he has been working on civil society, and this person was a part of this project, and unfortunately we decided to focus only on Kyrgyzstan, but there are interesting cases like civil society in Tajikistan, which can belong to the category of threatened group.
Thank you so much. Shavkat, я спросила, какие еще группы могли бы мы включить в эту книгу под тем же самым заголовком, который в книге. Ну, давайте тогда сейчас, Shavkat, если у вас есть возможность сейчас ответить. Давайте тогда Асель, может быть, Асель вы скажете, а потом мы перейдем к Shavkat.
Ну, если мы говорим про сейчас ситуацию COVID, да, то, конечно, это медицинские сотрудники.
Спасибо большое. Да, спасибо. Угу. Shavkat, Нина?
Да, я сюда бы... Можно ответить? Слышно, да, вам? Алло?
Да, слышно.
Слышно. Я сюда бы включил бы, кроме нашего владельцев кафе и ресторанов и общественного питания, сюда включил бы и торговцев, которые занимаются перевозкой транспортных средств и продажей. Потому что вот июньское событие 2010 года начался именно из этих групп. То есть вот, первые стычки были среди торговцев автотранспортных средств. Сюда могли бы сюда и включить, как они обеспечивают свою ежедневную стратегию безопасности. Эту группу я хотел бы включить, если была бы возможность. Спасибо.
Спасибо большое. Нина, вам слово.
We did some research with my students as a senior thesis or master dissertations. It was done on sex workers in Kyrgyzstan, and they have quite specific Securityscapes. And definitely it might be done on the migrants, on the labor migrants within Kyrgyzstan and outside of country. I believe that these people have very clear and very well organized Securityscapes.
Thank you so much, Nina. Thank you so much, Aijan, Arzuu, Nina, Aksana, Shavkat, Asel, for this amazing conversation today. Thank you, Nadira Komatova, for organizing us here today. Dear audience members, please join in again in a month. We'll discuss another book by Central Asian scholar. In 1 month, we'll announce it soon. Wishing everyone healthy, safe, happy weekend, and hope to see you soon again. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.